Hello, everybody. Sorry for the delay. A little bit of internet wonkiness happening here, but we're back. So, let's see here. What are we doing today? Why, we are doing... Yes, this is my Athena cosplay. Thank you very much. I've lost the mohawk, unfortunately. No mohawk today. But I've got my chiton on. Yes, as you can see, it is not a toga. It is a chiton. It is pinned, not wrapped. Yes, very exciting. Now, where have I put my book? There it is. All right. So, this is my big... It's green, so you can't see it, of course. This is my big book of mythology here. Ooh. Bullfinch's Mythology. We've had this book since... don't know when. Ages and ages and ages. And you can see, I don't know, well, maybe you can see, but here inside the front cover, we've got, oh dear, well, we've got some pages falling out, but we've got a whole bunch of, ooh, hello. There we go. You can see here, a whole bunch of people. Some roses doodled in there by probably 6-year-old Jess, you know, like we do. I hope everybody's having a lovely week. It's been a week, but we're going to relax now and we're going to have some good times with some good stories. What's everybody drinking today? It's a very well-loved book. It is, oof, it is overloved, I think, Sarah. Today I have iced tea, actually, because it's 70 degrees on Long Island, and, well, let's just go with it. It's a lovely minty green iced tea. We're going to pretend we don't know where it's from. But, here we go. Let's just jump right in. So the first story, if you are familiar with Shakespeare, you might recognize this one. We're going to start with Pyramus and Thisbe. Now, I won't be acting out all the bits and bobs, and I will not be representing a wall between them. We'll just be reading. So, if you're all ready, let's begin. Pyramus and Thisbe. Pyramus was the handsomest youth, and Thisbe the fairest maiden in all Babylonia, where Sarah. I'm starting again. Pyramus was the handsomest youth, and Thisbe the fairest maiden in all Babylonia, where Semiramis reigned. Their parents occupied adjoining houses, and neighborhood brought the young people together, and acquaintance ripened into love. They would gladly have married, but their parents forbade. Where have we heard that before? One thing, however, they could not forbid, that love should glow with equal ardor in the bosoms of both. They conversed by signs and glances, and the fire burned more intensely for being covered up. In the wall that parted the two houses there was a crack, caused by some fault in the structure. No one had remarked it before, but the lovers discovered it. What will not love discover? It afforded a passage to the voice, and tender messages used to pass backward and forward through the gap. As they stood, Pyramus on this side, Thisbe on that, their breaths would mingle. "Cruel wall," they said, "why do you keep two lovers apart? But we will not be ungrateful. We owe you, we confess, the privilege of transmitting loving words to willing ears." Such words they uttered on different sides of the wall, and when night came and they must say farewell, they pressed their lips upon the wall, she on her side, he on his, as they could come no nearer. Next morning, when Aurora had parted the stars, and the sun had melted the frost from the grass, they met at the accustomed spot. Then, after lamenting their hard fate, they agreed that next night, when all was still, they would slip away from the watchful eyes, leave their dwellings, and walk out into the fields, and to ensure a meeting, repair to a well-known edifice standing without the city's bounds, called the Tomb of Ninus, and the one who came first should await the other at the foot of a certain tree. It was a white mulberry tree, and stood near a cool spring. All was agreed on, and they waited impatiently for the sun to go down beneath the waters, and night to rise up from them. Then, cautiously, Thisbe stole forth, unobserved by the family, her head covered with a veil, made her way to the monument, and sat down under the tree. As she sat alone in the dim light of the evening, she descried a lioness, her jaws reeking with recent slaughter, approaching the fountain to slake her thirst. Thisbe fled at the sight and sought refuge in the hollow of a rock. As she fled, she dropped her veil. The lioness, after drinking at the spring, turned to retreat to the woods, and seeing the veil on the ground, tossed and rent it with her bloody mouth. Pyramus, having been delayed, he probably wouldn't stop to ask for directions. Pyramus, having been delayed, now approached the place of meeting. He saw in the sand the footsteps of the lion, and the color fled from his cheeks at the sight. Presently he found the veil all rent and bloody. "O hapless girl," said he, "I have been the cause of thy death. Thou, more worthy of life than I, hast fallen the first victim. I will follow. I am the guilty cause in tempting thee forth to a place of such peril, and not being myself on the spot to guard thee. Come forth, ye lions, from the rocks, and tear this guilty body with your teeth." He took up the veil, carried it with him to the appointed tree, and covered it with kisses and with tears. "My blood shall also stain your texture," said he, and drawing his sword, plunged it into his heart. The blood spurted from the wound and tinged the white mulberries of the tree all red, and sinking into the earth reached the roots, so that the red color mounted through the trunk to the fruit. By this time, Thisbe, still trembling with fear, yet wishing not to disappoint her lover, stepped cautiously forth, looking anxiously for the youth, eager to tell him the danger she had escaped. When she came to the spot and saw the changed color of the mulberries, she doubted it was the same place. While she hesitated, she saw the form of one struggling in the agonies of death. She started back. A shudder ran through her frame as a ripple on the face of the still water when a sudden breeze sweeps over it. But as soon as she recognized her lover, she screamed and beat her breast, embracing the lifeless body, pouring tears into its wounds and imprinting kisses on the cold lips. "O Pyramus," she cried, "what has done this? Answer me, Pyramus, it is your own Thisbe that speaks. Hear me, dearest, and lift that drooping head." At the name of Thisbe, Pyramus opened his eyes, then closed them again. She saw her veil stained with blood, and the scabbard empty of its sword. "Thy own hand has slain thee, and for my sake," she said. "I too can be brave for once, and my love is as strong as thine. I will follow thee in death, for I have been the cause, and death which alone could part us shall not prevent my joining thee. And ye unhappy parents of us both, deny us not our united request. As love and death have joined us, let one tomb contain us, and thou, tree, retain the marks of slaughter. Let thy berries still serve for memorials of our blood." So saying, she plunged the sword into her breast. Her parents ratified her wish. The gods also ratified it. The two bodies were buried in one sepulchre, and the tree ever after brought forth purple berries, as it does to this day. The urn? What urn? What are you talking about? You're going to have so much to say, and I'm going to be so lost. I can tell already, just because you know so much about Greek myth. All right. Let's see. Shall we have another tragic tale? You are your own course. Let's see. I have a few bookmarked in here. The albatross myth. Do you know who it involves? Because I can try to find it. Actually, I sent you the list. I sent you the table of contents. But let's go to another sad tale, another tragedy. A railroad line on the road to hell. Orpheus and Eurydice. Orpheus was the son of Apollo and the muse Calliope. He was presented by his father with a lyre and taught to play upon it, which he did to such perfection that nothing could withstand the charm of his music. Not only his fellow mortals, but wild beasts were softened by his strains, and gathering round him laid by their fierceness, and stood entranced with his lay. Nay, the very trees and rocks were sensible to the charm. The former crowded round him, and the latter relaxed somewhat of their hardness, softened by his notes. Hymen had been called to bless with his presence the nuptials of Orpheus with Eurydice. But though he attended, he brought no happy omens with him. His very torch smoked and brought tears into their eyes. In coincidence with such prognostics, Eurydice, shortly after her marriage, while wandering with the nymphs, her companions, was seen by the shepherd Aristaeus, who was struck by her beauty and made advances towards her. She fled, and in flying trod upon a snake in the grass, was bitten in the foot, and died. Orpheus sang his grief to all who breathed the upper air, both gods and men, and finding it all unavailing, resolved to seek his wife in the regions of the dead. He descended by a cave situated on the side of the promontory of Taenarus, and arrived at the Stygian realm. He passed through crowds of ghosts, and presented himself before the throne of Pluto and Proserpine. Accompanying the words with the lyre, he sang, "O deities of the underworld, to whom all who live must come, hear my words, for they are true. I come not to spy out the secrets of Tartarus, nor to try my strength against the three-headed dog with snaky hair who guards the entrance. I come to seek my wife, whose opening years the poisonous viper's fang has brought to an untimely end." Yes, Roman names. It's very strange. It goes back and forth between Roman and Greek names. So we'll just call it mythology. They're all the same anyway. The Romans stole them, etc., etc. Love has led me here. Love, a god all-powerful with us who dwells on the earth, and if all traditions say true, not less, so here. I implore you, by these abodes full of terror, these realms of silence and uncreated things, unite again the thread of Eurydice's life. We all are destined to you, and sooner or later must pass to your domain. She too, when she shall have filled her term of life, will be rightly yours. But till then, grant her to me, I beseech you. If you deny me, I cannot return alone. You shall triumph in the death of us both. As he sang these tender strains, the very ghosts shed tears. Tantalus, in spite of his thirst, stopped for a moment his efforts for water. Ixion's wheel stood still. The vulture ceased to tear the giant's liver. The daughters of Danaus rested from their task of drawing water in a sieve, and Sisyphus sat on his rock to listen. Then, for the first time, it is said, the cheeks of the Furies were wet with tears. Proserpine could not resist, and Pluto himself gave way. Eurydice was called. She came from among the new-arrived ghosts, limping with her wounded foot. Orpheus was permitted to take her away with him, on one condition: that he should not turn around to look at her till they should have reached the upper air. Under this condition they proceeded on their way, he leading, she following, through passages dark and deep, in total silence, till they had nearly reached the outlet into the upper world, when Orpheus, in a moment of forgetfulness, to assure himself that she was still following, cast a glance behind him, when instantly she was borne away. Stretching out their arms to embrace each other, they grasped only the air. Dying now a second time, she yet cannot reproach her husband, for how can she blame his impatience to behold her? Farewell, she said, a last farewell, and was hurried away so fast that the sound hardly reached his ears. Orpheus endeavored to follow her, and besought permission to return and try once more for her release. But the stern ferryman repulsed him, and refused passage. 7 days he lingered about the brink, without food or sleep. Then, bitterly accusing of cruelty the powers of Erebus, he sang his complaints to the rocks and the mountains, melting the hearts of tigers and moving the oaks from their stations. He held himself aloof from womankind, dwelling constantly on the recollection of his sad mischance. The Thracian maidens tried their best to captivate him, but he repulsed their advances. They bore with him as long as they could, but finding him insensible one day, excited by the rites of Bacchus, one of them exclaimed, "See yonder our despiser," and threw at him her javelin. The weapon, as soon as it came within the sound of his lyre, fell harmless at his feet. So did all the stones that they threw at him. But the women raised a scream and drowned the voice of the music, and then the missiles reached him, and soon were stained with his blood. The maniacs tore him limb from limb, and threw his head and his lyre into the river Hebrus, down which they floated, murmuring sad music, to which the shores responded a plaintive symphony. The Muses gathered up the fragments of his body and buried them at Libethra, where the nightingale is said to sing over his grave more sweetly than in any other part of Greece. His lyre was placed by Jupiter among the stars. His shade passed a second time to Tartarus, where he sought out his Eurydice and embraced her with eager arms. They roam the happy fields together now, sometimes he leading, sometimes she, and Orpheus gazes as much as he will upon her, no longer incurring a penalty for a thoughtless glance. That's kind of a horrifying little ending to that one, isn't it? It's kind of, yeah. But they also get, to see each other in the afterlife, so 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I suppose. Yeah, damn is right. Now, hold on a moment. Is this the guy? I want to double check. Now, they all have the same names, don't they? Let's see. The shepherd Aristeus. Okay. So, that was the one who was chasing Eurydice. The next story in the book is called Aristeus the Beekeeper. Do we want to read about some bees? Why not? Aristeus the Beekeeper. Man avails himself of the instincts of the inferior animals for his own advantage. Hence sprang the art of keeping bees. Honey must first have been known as a wild product. The bees building their structures in hollow trees or holes in the rocks, or any similar cavity that chance offered. Thus, occasionally, the carcass of a dead animal would be occupied by the bees for that purpose. It was no doubt from such incident that the superstition arose that the bees were engendered by the decaying flesh of an animal, and Virgil, in the following story, shows how this supposed fact may be turned to account for renewing the swarm when it has been lost by disease or accident. It's a funny book because it tells the stories, but it also tells you about the tellers of the stories. There's references to other other works that involve these stories. So, Pope and Southey, people who have written about these stories. It includes little bits and pieces of them as well. So let's move on to Aristaeus and Cyrene. Aristaeus, who first taught the management of bees, was the son of the water nymph Cyrene. His bees had perished, and he resorted for aid to his mother. He stood at the riverside and thus addressed her. "O mother, the pride of my life is taken from me. I have lost my precious bees. My care and skill have availed me nothing, and you, my mother, have not warded off from me the blow of misfortune." His mother heard these complaints as she sat in her palace at the bottom of the river, with her attendant nymphs around her. They were engaged in female occupations, spinning and weaving, while one told stories to amuse the rest. The sad voice of Aristaeus interrupting their occupation, one of them put her head above the water, and seeing him, returned and gave information to his mother, who she ordered that he should be brought in her presence. The river, at her command, opened itself and let him pass, while it stood curled like a mountain on either side. He descended to the region where the fountains of the great rivers lie. He saw the enormous receptacles of waters, and was almost deafened with the roar, while he surveyed them hurrying off in various directions to water the face of the earth. Arriving at his mother's apartment, he was hospitably received by Cyrene and her nymphs, who spread their table with the richest dainties. They first poured out libations to Neptune, then regaled themselves with the feast. And after that Cyrene thus addressed him. "There is an old prophet named Proteus, who dwells in the sea and is a favorite of Neptune, whose herd of sea calves he pastures." Oh, we love a sea cow, don't we? We love a sea cow. "We nymphs hold him in great respect, for he is a learned sage and knows all things, past, present, and to come. He can tell you, my son, the cause of the mortality among your bees, and how you may remedy it. But he will not do it voluntarily, however you may entreat him. You must compel him by force. If you seize him and chain him, he will answer your questions in order to get released, for he cannot, by all his arts, get away if you hold fast the chains. I will carry you to his cave, where he comes at noon to take his midday repose. Then you may easily secure him. But when he finds himself captured, his resort is to a power he possesses of changing himself into various forms. He will become a wild boar or a fierce tiger, a scaly dragon, or a lion with yellow mane. Or he will make a noise like the crackling of flames or the rush of water, so as to tempt you into letting go the chain, when he will make his escape. But you have only to keep him fast bound, and at last, when he finds all his arts unavailing, he will return to his own figure and obey your commands." So saying, she sprinkled her son with fragrant nectar, the beverage of the gods, and immediately an unusual vigor filled his frame, and the courage of his heart, while perfume breathed all around him. That's not really a thing most mothers would tell their sons. Be like, "Oh, hey, go find this guy and tie him up with a bunch of chains, and then when he can't get away from you, he'll help you." Yeah. The nymph led her son to the prophet's cave and concealed him among the recesses of rocks, while she herself took her place behind the clouds. When noon came, and the hour when men and herds retreat from the glaring sun to indulge in quiet slumber, Proteus issued from the water, followed by his herd of sea calves, which spread themselves among the shore. He sat on the rock and counted his herd, then stretched himself on the floor of the cave and went to sleep. Aristaeus hardly allowed him to get fairly asleep before he fixed the fetters on him and shouted aloud. Proteus, waking and finding himself captured, immediately resorted to his arts, becoming first a fire, then a flood, then a horrible wild beast in rapid succession. Are any of you familiar with the story of Tam Lin? Because this sounds vaguely familiar. Except he's now trying to escape. It's the Fairy Queen turning him into different things. But anyway. But finding all would not do, he at last resumed his own form and addressed the youth in angry accents. Who are you, bold youth? Bold Ute. Who are you, bold youth, who thus invade my abode? And what do you want with me? Aristaeus replied, Proteus, you know already, for it is needless for any one to attempt to deceive you. And do you also cease your efforts to elude me? I am led hither by divine assistance, to know from you the cause of my misfortune and how to remedy it. At these words the prophet, fixing on him his grey eyes with a piercing look, thus spoke. You received the merited reward of your deeds by which Eurydice met her death. For in flying from you she trod upon a serpent, of whose bite she died. To avenge her death, the nymphs, her companions, have sent this destruction to your bees. Gotta love a girl gang. You have to appease their anger, and thus it must be done. Select 4 bulls of perfect form and size, and 4 cows of equal beauty. Build 4 altars to the nymphs, and sacrifice the animals, leaving their carcasses in the leafy grove. To Orpheus and Eurydice you shall pay such funeral honors as may allay their resentment. Returning after 9 days, you will examine the bodies of the cattle slain, and see what will befall. Aristaeus faithfully obeyed these directions. He sacrificed the cattle. He left their bodies in the grove. He offered funeral honors to the shades of Orpheus and Eurydice. Then, returning on the 9th day, he examined the bodies of the animals, and, wonderful to relate, a swarm of bees had taken possession of one of the carcasses and were pursuing their labors there, as in a hive. Shall we read about more poets? This is fun. The following are other celebrated mythical poets and musicians, some of whom were hardly inferior to Orpheus himself. Just a few little blurbs here. Amphion. Amphion was the son of Jupiter and Antiope, queen of Thebes. With his twin brother, Zethus, he was exposed at birth on Mount Cithaeron, where they grew up among shepherds, not knowing their parentage. Mercury gave Amphion a lyre and taught him to play upon it, and his brother occupied himself in hunting and tending the flocks. Meanwhile, Antiope, their mother, who had been treated with great cruelty by Lycus, the usurping king of Thebes, and by Dirce, his wife, found means to inform her children of their rights and to summon them to her assistance. With a band of their fellow herdsmen, they attacked and slew Lycus, and tying Dirce by the hair of her head to a bull, let him drag her till she was dead. Amphion, having become king of Thebes, fortified the city with a wall. It is said that when he played on his lyre, the stones moved of their own accord and took their places in the wall. Big yikes. Oh, this one's fun, too. Linus. Linus was the instructor of Hercules in music, but having one day reproved his pupil rather harshly, he roused the anger of Hercules, who struck him with his lyre and killed him. That's it. That's the entry. That's the whole tweet. One sentence. Oh, gosh. Marsyas. Here we go. Minerva, Athena, invented the flute and played upon it to the delight of all the celestial auditors. But the mischievous urchin Cupid, having dared to laugh at the queer face which the goddess made while playing, Minerva threw the instrument indignantly away, and it fell down to earth and was found by Marsyas. He blew upon it, and drew from it such ravishing sounds that he was tempted to challenge Apollo himself to a musical contest. The god, of course, triumphed, and punished Marsyas by flaying him alive. let's move on. We're good with muses, I think. I think we're good. Let's move on from the bards and such. Yes, yes. Let's see. Oh, here's a few little blurbs as well. Music hypes you up enough to fight gods. That's what you call bardic inspiration, right? Heck yeah. Now, the Dwarf Queen knows this already, but I did have a D&D character who was a bard who did fight some gods. He didn't get flayed alive. Yes, hug your local bard today. Everybody loves a bard, right? That's what we're doing here. Telling stories. Singing songs. Well, I'm not singing songs, but maybe another time. Let's read about some of the oracles. The Oracle of Jupiter. The most ancient Grecian oracle was that of Jupiter at Dodona. According to one account, it was established in the following manner. 2 black doves took their flight from Thebes in Egypt. One flew to Dodona in Epirus, and alighting in a grove of oaks, it proclaimed in human language to the inhabitants of the district that they must there establish an oracle of Jupiter. The other dove flew to the temple of Jupiter Ammon in the Libyan oasis, and delivered a similar command there. Another account is that they were not doves but priestesses who were carried off from Thebes in Egypt by the Phoenicians, and who set up oracles at Oasis and Dodona. The responses of the oracles were given from the trees, by the branches rustling in the wind, the sounds being interpreted by the priests. I love that. I love the idea of an oracle of trees. It's very, was that in Pocahontas? I think that was in Pocahontas. You went to old Grandmother Willow. Ask the trees. The Oracle of Apollo. But the most celebrated of the Grecian oracles was that of Apollo at Delphi, a city built on the slopes of Parnassus. It had been observed at a very early period that the goats feeding on Parnassus were thrown into convulsions when they approached a certain long, deep cleft in the side of the mountain. This was owing to the peculiar vapor arising out of the caverns, and one of the goatherds was induced to try its effects upon himself. Your goat has convulsions, so you're like, I better try that. Inhaling the intoxicating air, he was affected in the same manner as the cattle had been, and the inhabitants of the surrounding country, unable to explain the circumstance, imputed the convulsive ravings to which he gave utterance while under the power of the exhalations to a divine inspiration. The fact was speedily circulated wildly, and a temple was erected on the spot. The prophetic influence was at first variously attributed to the goddess Earth, to Neptune, Themis, and others, but it was at length assigned to Apollo, and to him alone. A priestess was appointed, whose office it was to inhale the hallowed air, and whose name was Pythia. She was prepared for this duty by previous ablution at the fountain of Castalia. Being crowned with laurel, was seated upon a tripod similarly adorned, which was placed over the chasm whence the divine afflatus proceeded. Her inspired words, while thus situated, were interpreted by the priest. The Oracle of Asclepius. There were numerous oracles of Asclepius, but the most celebrated one was at Epidaurus. Here the sick sought responses and the recovery of their health by sleeping in the temple. It has been inferred from the accounts that have come down to us that the treatment of the sick resembled what is now called animal magnetism or mesmerism. Serpents were sacred to Asclepius, probably because of a superstition that those animals have a faculty of renewing their youth by a change of skin. The worship of Asclepius was introduced into Rome in a time of great sickness, and an embassy sent to the temple of Epidaurus to entreat the aid of the god. Asclepius was propitious, and on the return of the ship accompanied it in the form of a serpent. Arriving in the river Tiber, the serpent glided from the vessel and took possession of an island in the river, and a temple was there erected in his honor. We all love Asclepius, don't we? A little bit of that old-timey sawbones medicine, huh? I like those. I like the oracles. Those are fun. All right, what time is it? 2:40. Oh, brilliant. We have so much time. Yes, the medical symbol. Now remember, the rod with one snake, that's Asclepius. The rod with wings and two snakes, that's Mercury, aka Hermes. Mr. Hermes. We're going to save that one for later. Oh no. Well, don't know what this was. Came out of the book. Oopsies. All right. So you said Theseus and the Minotaur. Let's see. I've got Theseus here. Let me see if it's the one with the Minotaur. Amazons, Olympic Games, Labyrinth. There we go. All right, here we go. Let's read a little bit about Theseus. Oh boy, there are some names in this. I'm just gonna say it. There's some names. Theseus was the son of Aegeus, king of Athens, and of Ethra, daughter of the king of Trozen. I don't care for this. There's too many of those little letters squished together. Theseus was the son of Aegeus, king of Athens, and of Ethra, daughter of the king of Trozen. He was brought up at Trozen, and when arrived at manhood was to proceed to Athens and present himself to his father. Aegeus, on parting from Ethra before the birth of his son, placed his sword and shoes under a large stone, and directed her to send his son to him when he became strong enough to roll away the stone and take them from under it. A little bit of King Arthur happening here. That's for another session. When she thought the time had come, his mother led Theseus to the stone, and he removed it with ease and took the sword and shoes. As the roads were infested with robbers, his grandfather pressed him earnestly to take the shorter route by sea. But the youth, feeling in himself the spirit and the soul of a hero, and eager to signalize himself like Hercules, with whose fame all Greece then rang, by destroying the evildoers and monsters that oppressed the country, determined on the more perilous and adventurous journey by land. His first day's journey brought him to Epidaurus, where dwelt a man named Periphetes, a son of Vulcan. This ferocious savage always went armed with a club of iron, and all travelers stood in terror of his violence. When he saw Theseus approach, he assailed him, but speedily fell beneath the blows of the young hero, who took possession of his club and bore it ever afterwards as a memorial of his first victory. Several similar contests with the petty tyrants and marauders of the country followed, in all of which Theseus was victorious. One of these evildoers was called Procrustes, or the Stretcher. He had an iron bedstead, on which he used to tie all travelers who fell into his hands. If they were shorter than the bed, he stretched their limbs to make them fit. If they were longer than the bed, he lopped off a portion. Theseus served him as he had served others. Having overcome all the perils of the road, Theseus at length reached Athens, where new dangers awaited him. Medea, the sorceress, who had fled from Corinth after her separation from Jason, had become the wife of Aegeus, the father of Theseus. Knowing by her arts who he was, and fearing the loss of her influence with her husband if Theseus should be acknowledged as his son, she filled the mind of Aegeus with suspicions of the young stranger, and induced him to present a cup of poison. But at the moment when Theseus stepped forward to take it, the sight of the sword which he wore discovered to his father who he was, and prevented the fatal draught. Medea, detected in her arts, fled once more from deserved punishment, and arrived in Asia, where the country afterwards called Media received its name from her. Theseus was acknowledged by his father and declared his successor. The Athenians were at that time in deep affliction, on account of the tribute which they were forced to pay to Minos, king of Crete. I think we can see if maybe we can find the story of Medea in here, and I don't know, maybe we could read that one too. Here we are. The Athenians were at that time in deep affliction, on account of the tribute which they were forced to pay to Minos, king of Crete. This tribute consisted of 7 youths and 7 maidens, who were sent every year to be devoured by the Minotaur, a monster with a bull's body and a human head. It was exceedingly strong and fierce, and was kept in a labyrinth constructed by Daedalus, so artfully contrived that whoever was enclosed in it could by no means find his way out unassisted. Here the Minotaur roamed and was fed with human victims. You remind me of the babe. What babe? Babe with the power. What power? Sorry. Wrong labyrinth. Theseus resolved to deliver his countrymen from this calamity, or to die in the attempt. Accordingly, when the time of sending off the tribute came, and the youths and maidens were, according to custom, drawn by lot to be sent, he offered himself as one of the victims, in spite of the entreaties of his father. The ship departed under black sails, as usual, which Theseus promised his father to change for white in case of his returning victorious. When they arrived in Crete, the youths and maidens were exhibited before Minos, and Ariadne, the daughter of the king being present, became deeply enamored by Theseus, by whom her love was readily returned. She furnished him with a sword, with which to encounter the Minotaur, and with a clue of thread by which he might find his way out of the labyrinth. He was successful, slew the Minotaur, escaped from the labyrinth, and taking Ariadne as the companion on his way, with his rescued companions sailed for Athens. On their way, they stopped at the island of Naxos, where Theseus abandoned Ariadne, leaving her asleep. His excuse for this ungrateful treatment was that Minerva appeared to him in a dream and commanded him to do so. On approaching the coast of Attica, Theseus forgot the signal appointed by his father and neglected to raise the white sails, and the old king, thinking his son had perished, put an end to his own life. Theseus thus became king of Athens. You done goofed it. You messed up, Theseus, and yet somehow you managed to become king of Athens. I don't understand how that works. Yeah, bro, what? I don't care for it. Some more Shakespearean references here. One of the most celebrated of the adventures of Theseus is his expedition against the Amazons. He assailed them before they had recovered from the attack of Hercules, and carried off their queen, Antiope. The Amazons in their turn invaded the country of Athens and penetrated into the city itself, and the final battle in which Theseus overcame them was fought in the very midst of the city. This battle was one of the favorite subjects of ancient sculptors, and is commemorated in several works of art that are still extant. Okay, cool. Yeah, I wish they'd spent a little more time with Ariadne. Like, hello? She helped you? Like, she thought, oh, here's a ball of yarn. Go find your way out of the labyrinth. Like, that was smart. That was really smart. This one's interesting. The friendship between Theseus and Perithous was of a most intimate nature, yet it originated in the midst of arms. Perithous had made an irruption into the plain of Marathon and carried off the herds of the king of Athens. Theseus went to repel the plunderers. The moment Perithous beheld him, he was seized with admiration. He stretched out his hand as a token of peace and cried, "Be judge thyself, what satisfaction dost thou require?" "Thy friendship," replied the Athenian, and they swore inviolable fidelity. Their deeds corresponded to their professions, and they ever continued true brothers in arms. Just, yeah. Each of them aspired to espouse a daughter of Jupiter. Theseus fixed his choice on Helen, then but a child, afterwards so celebrated as the cause of the Trojan War, and with the aid of his friend he carried her off. Perithous aspired to the wife of the monarch of Erebus, and Theseus, though aware of the danger, accompanied the ambitious lover in his descent to the underworld. Why are these idiots going after women who are already married to people? Like, just leave it alone. Theseus, you goofed. What a terrible person Theseus is. Yeah, right? Oh, this is fun. Okay. He accompanied the ambitious lover in his descent to the underworld. But Pluto seized and set them on an enchanted rock at his palace gate, where they remained till Hercules arrived and liberated Theseus, leaving Perithous to his fate. Woof. Harsh, dude. After the death of Antiope, Theseus married Phaedra, daughter of Minos, king of Crete. Wasn't that Ariadne's... Wait. Theseus, you're being a dipshit. Ariadne, the daughter of the king. So he's marrying the girl that he abandoned on the island. He's marrying her sister. Good job, dude. After the death of Antiope, Theseus married Phaedra, daughter of Minos, king of Crete. Phaedra saw in Hippolytus, the son of Theseus, a youth endowed with all the graces and virtues of his father, and of an age corresponding to her own. She loved him, but he repulsed her advances, and her love was changed to hate. She used her influence over her infatuated husband to cause him to be jealous of his son, and he imprecated the vengeance of Neptune upon him. As Hippolytus was one day driving his chariot along the shore, a sea monster raised himself above the waters and frightened the horses so that they ran away and dashed the chariot to pieces. Hippolytus was killed, but by Diana's assistance, Asclepius restored him to life. Diana removed Hippolytus from the power of his deluded father and false stepmother, and placed him in Italy under the protection of the nymph Egeria. Theseus at length lost the favor of his people and retired to the court of Lycomedes, king of Scyros, who at first received him kindly, but afterwards treacherously slew him. In a later age, the Athenian general Cimon discovered the place where his remains were laid and caused them to be removed to Athens, where they were deposited in a temple called the Theseum, erected in honor of the hero. Yikes. Yikes! I want to know why he treacherously slew him. Like, that's just like, oh yeah, and then this guy killed him. But like, why? I mean, besides being an awful person, like, what did he do? What else can we add to this litany of terrible things that Theseus did? Oh, here, well, let's continue. I like this. All right. So it says here that Theseus is a semi historical personage. It is recorded of him that he united the several tribes by whom the territory of Attica was then possessed into one state, of which Athens was the capital. In commemoration of this important event, he instituted the festival of Panathena in honor of Minerva, or Athena, the patron deity of Athens. This festival differed from the other Grecian games chiefly in two particulars. It was peculiar to the Athenians, and its chief feature was a solemn procession in which the peplus, or sacred robe of Minerva, was carried to the Parthenon and suspended before the statue of the goddess. The peplus was covered with embroidery, worked by select virgins of the noblest families in Athens. The procession consisted of persons of all ages and sexes. The old men carried olive branches in their hands, and the young men bore arms. The young women carried baskets on their heads containing the sacred utensils, cakes, and all things necessary for the sacrifices. The procession formed the subject of the bas-reliefs which embellished the outside of the temple of the Parthenon. A considerable portion of these sculptures is now in the British Museum, among those known as the Elgin Marbles. Should probably give those back, right? Right, British Museum? You might want to give those back. It seems not inappropriate to mention here the other celebrated national games of the Greeks. The first and most distinguished were the Olympic, founded, it was said, by Jupiter himself. They were celebrated at Olympia in Elis. Vast numbers of spectators flocked to them from every part of Greece, and from Asia, Africa, and Sicily. They were repeated every 5th year in midsummer, and continued 5 days. They gave rise to the custom of reckoning time and dating events by the Olympiads. The first Olympiad is generally considered as corresponding with the year 776 BC. The Pythian Games were celebrated in the vicinity of Delphi, the Isthmian on the Corinthian Isthmus. Okay, so the Pythian Games are in Delphi, the Isthmian on the Corinthian Isthmus, and the Nemean at Nemea, a city of Argolis. Woof. Sorry, guys. I'm doing my best over here. Oh gosh, I took French in high school. The exercises of these games were of 5 sorts: running, leaping, wrestling, throwing the quoit, and hurling the javelin, or boxing. Besides these exercises of bodily strength and agility, there were contests in music, poetry, and eloquence. Thus these games furnished poets, musicians, and authors the best opportunities to present their productions to the public, and the fame of the victors was diffused far and wide. I think we need more Olympic poetry. What do you think? I mean, I don't necessarily know that the Americans would win very much, but I'm here for the poetry of the Olympics. All right, let us continue with Daedalus. The labyrinth, from which Theseus escaped by means of the clue of Ariadne, was built by Daedalus, a most skillful artificer. It was an edifice with numberless winding passages and turnings opening into one another, and seeming to have neither beginning nor end, like the river Meander, which returns on itself and flows now onwards and now backwards, and is in its course to the sea. Shh! No spoilers, Dwarf Queen! Daedalus built the labyrinth for King Minos, but afterwards lost the favor of the king and was shut up in a tower. He contrived to make his escape from his prison, but could not leave the island by sea, as the king kept strict watch on all vessels, and permitted none to sail without being carefully searched. Minos may control the land and sea, said Daedalus, but not the regions of the air. I will try that way. So he set forth to work to fabricate wings for himself and his young son Icarus. He wrought feathers together, beginning with the smallest and adding larger, so as to form an increasing surface. The larger ones he secured with thread, and the smaller with wax, and gave the whole a gentle curvature like the wings of a bird. Icarus the boy stood and looked on, sometimes running to gather up the feathers which the wind had blown away, and then handling the wax and working it over with his fingers, by his play impeding his father in his labors. When at last the work was done, the artist, waving his wings, found himself buoyed upwards and hung suspended, poising himself on the beaten air. He next equipped his son in the same manner, and taught him how to fly, as a bird tempts her young ones from the lofty nest into the air. When all was prepared for flight, he said, Icarus, my son, I charge you to keep at a moderate height, for if you fly too low, the damp will clog your wings, and if too high, the heat will melt them. Keep near me, and you will be safe. While he gave these instructions and fitted the wings to his shoulders, the face of the father was wet with tears, and his hands trembled. He kissed the boy, not knowing that it was for the last time. Then, rising on his wings, he flew off, encouraging him to follow, and looked back from his own flight to see how his son managed his wings. As they flew, the ploughman stopped his work to gaze, and the shepherd leaned on his staff and watched them, astonished at the sight, and thinking they were gods who could thus cleave the air. They passed Samos and Delos on the left, and Lebynthos on the right, when the boy, exulting in his career, began to leave the guidance of his companion and soar upwards, as if to reach heaven. The nearness of the blazing sun softened the wax which held the feathers together, and they came off. He fluttered with his arms, but no feathers remained to hold the air. While his mouth uttered cries to his father, it was submerged in the blue waters of the sea, which thenceforth was called by his name. His father cried, Icarus, Icarus, where are you? At last he saw the feathers floating on the water, and bitterly lamenting his own arts, he buried the body and called the land Icaria in memory of his child. Daedalus arrived safe in Sicily, where he built a temple to Apollo and hung up his wings, an offering to the god. Daedalus was so proud of his achievements that he could not bear the idea of a rival. His sister had placed her son Perdix under his charge to be taught the mechanical arts. He was an apt scholar and gave striking evidences of ingenuity. Walking on the seashore, he picked up the spine of a fish. Imitating it, he took a piece of iron and notched it on the edge, and thus invented the saw. He put two pieces of iron together, connecting them at one end with a rivet, and sharpening the other ends, and made a pair of compasses. Daedalus was so envious of his nephew's performances that he took an opportunity, when they were together one day on the top of a high tower, to push him off. But Minerva, who favors ingenuity, saw him falling, and arrested his fate by changing him into a bird called after his name, the partridge. The bird does not build his nest in the trees, nor take lofty flights, but nestles in the hedges, and mindful of his fall, avoids high places. I enjoy that, Finn. That's a very good headcanon. That's good. I like that. Alrighty. Well, we are going to take a little bit of a break right now. I hope you have all been enjoying these wonderful Greek tales. Mindful of the fall, yes. Thank you so much for coming. I'll be back in about 5 or 10 minutes. Gonna take, a little run around, get some stuff together. Gonna have a little snack. Go grab a snack. Go grab a beverage. Remember to hydrate before you dihydrate. And we'll be back in a little bit. Thanks, guys.
You can say all that you want, but you and I were meant for this. Sometimes you gotta let go. Guess I gotta let you go. When I'm up through the night, I can't turn down the noise, tear all the worries out of my mind. About who I'm supposed to be, I start to believe I can't get it right. Remember the days I let slip away, they were simpler times. Mama told me before you leave, if there's only one thing you remember from me, child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are, don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars, you'll be dancing, dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life, you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life, you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life, you'll be dancing on the moon. Dancing on the moon. Dancing on the moon. Maybe my compass was wrong, and I'm still on my way closer each day to where I belong. I'm still rolling the dice, praying sometimes it don't last that long. I'm losing my faith, I'm walking away from what you knew all along. Mama told me before you leave, if there's only one thing you remember from me, child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are, don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars, you'll be dancing, dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life, you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life, you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life, you'll be dancing on the moon. Dancing on the moon. Child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are, don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars, you'll be dancing, dancing on the moon.
Tell me who broke your heart, 'cause I could tell you who demolished mine. Tell me how you got those scars. I'll find the beauty in every line across your skin. It's like you're convinced that you're stuck the way you are, driving in your car to reach a dead end. Is that all this is? It's cool if you think that I'm wasting my time, but you've gotta stop holding me back. What's up with that? I don't wanna love you. Try to convince, use every trick that's up my sleeve. like you're convinced that you're stuck the way you are. Driving in your car to reach a dead end. Is that all this is? It's cool if you think that I'm wasting my time, but you've gotta stop pulling me back. What's up with that? I don't wanna love you. Try to convince, use every trick that's up my sleeve. I don't wanna beg you. Show you my soul, if you're gonna hold it all against me. When you push me enough to play. You're pushing me away.
And we are back. Hello, hello, everybody. Um, Thank you so much for joining me for our Tea Time Tales, doing some Greek and Roman mythology. Mostly Greek. The Romans stole it, don't you know? But it's fine. It's fine. It's good stories, all the same. If you are new around here, we can give you a little bit of insight into what we're doing here. That's our little hello button here. So, oh, yes, we're going to tell some stories. Today we're doing Bullfinch's Mythology. So that's this book here that I've got. It's green, so you can't see it, but it's huge, it's old, it's loved. And I'm very excited to be reading these tales. Some of them are very familiar, some of them are a little different. Next up, next week, let's see, what do we have coming next week? Ba-ba-da-ba. Oh, I'm excited. Next week we are reading from Edith Nesbit's The Book of Dragons. That's going to be a fun one. After that, we're doing Juvenilia, which is Jane Austen, tales from that she wrote when she was young, before she went off to do Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice and all those other wonderful favorite ones. And then the 28th, which is the Saturday after American Thanksgiving, I will be doing some indigenous stories from Native Americans. I'm very excited about that one. I'm looking forward to it. And I hope you will join me throughout the month of November so we can do some good things. If you have not already, you can definitely go ahead and pop over to the Chaotic Tiefling Discord. You are welcome to make suggestions, make requests for stories, either based on what we are doing here in the schedule, but I also have coming up in December, yes, I know dates and things, it's fine. In December, I am going to have just a specifically audience request. So any story, as long as it's in the public domain, you can go ahead and pop that in the Discord. You can also recommend a story by emailing me at thebardicbelle@gmail.com if you don't feel like joining Discord, if that's not your thing. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and let's get back into our Greek tales, shall we? All right. I shared a meme the other day, and it got some excitement going. So I don't know how long this is, so I'm going to read Bullfinch's account of the Trojan War. It is not a translation of Homer. It is its own little section, as the others have been. So we'll see how far we get. It's a lot going on, but I am hoping that once we have covered the Trojan War, we'll be able to go back to another little story that I like, and we'll get that one in as well. So let's begin. The Trojan War, the Iliad. Minerva was the goddess of wisdom, but on one occasion, she did a very foolish thing. She entered into competition with Juno and Venus for the prize of beauty. It happened thus. At the nuptials of Peleus and Thetis, All the gods were invited, with the exception of Eris, or Discord. Enraged at her exclusion, the goddess threw a golden apple among the guests, with the inscription, "For the fairest." Thereupon, Juno, Venus, and Minerva each claimed the apple. Jupiter, not willing to decide in so delicate a matter, sent the goddesses to Mount Ida, where the beautiful shepherd Paris was tending his flocks, and to him was committed the decision. The goddesses accordingly appeared before him. Juno promised him power and riches, Minerva glory and renown in war. And Venus, the fairest of all women, for his wife. Paris decided in favor of Venus and gave her the golden apple, thus making the other two goddesses his enemies. Maybe Jupiter was onto something, ya think? Sorry, just adjusting a little thing here. There we go. Okay. Under the protection of Venus, Paris sailed to Greece and was hospitably received by Menelaus, king of Sparta. Now Helen, the wife of Menelaus, was the very woman whom Venus had destined for Paris, the fairest of her sex. She had been sought as a bride by numerous suitors, and before her decision was made known, they all, at the suggestion of Ulysses, one of their number, took an oath that they would defend her from all injury and avenge her cause if necessary. She chose Menelaus, and was living with him happily when Paris became their guest. Paris, aided by Venus, persuaded her to elope with him and carried her to Troy, whence arose the famous Trojan War, the theme of the greatest poems of antiquity, those of Homer and Virgil. Menelaus called upon his brother, chieftains of Greece, to fulfill their pledge and join him in his efforts to recover his wife. They generally came forward, but Ulysses, who had married Penelope, was very happy in his wife and child, had no disposition to embark in such a troublesome affair. He therefore hung back, and Palamedes was sent to urge him. When Palamedes arrived at Ithaca, Ulysses pretended to be mad. He yoked an ass and an ox together to the plow, and began to sow salt. Palamedes, to try him, placed the infant Telemachus before the plow, whereupon the father turned the plow aside, showing plainly that he was no madman, and after that could no longer refuse to fulfill his promise. Okay. Being now himself gained for the undertaking, he lent his aid to bring in other reluctant chiefs, especially Achilles. This hero was the son of that Thetis at whose marriage the apple of discord had been thrown among the goddesses. Thetis was herself one of the immortals, a sea nymph, and knowing that her son was fated to perish before Troy if he went on the expedition, she endeavored to prevent his going. She sent him away to the court of King Lycomedes, and induced him to conceal himself in the disguise of a maiden among the daughters of the king. Ulysses, hearing he was there, went disguised as a merchant to the palace, and offered for sale female ornaments, among which he had placed some arms. While the king's daughters were engrossed with the other contents of the merchant's pack, Achilles handled the weapons, and thereby betrayed himself to the keen eye of Ulysses, who found no great difficulty in persuading him to disregard his mother's prudent counsels and join his countrymen in the war. Priam was the king of Troy, and Paris, the shepherd and seducer of Helen, was his son. Paris had been brought up in obscurity because there were certain ominous forebodings connected with him from his infancy that he would be the ruin of the state. These forebodings seemed at length likely to be realized, for the Grecian armament, now in preparation, was the greatest that had ever been fitted out. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and brother of the injured Menelaus, was chosen commander-in-chief. Achilles was their most illustrious warrior. After him ranked Ajax, gigantic in size and of great courage, but dull of intellect. Diomede, second only to Achilles in all the qualities of a hero, Ulysses, famous for his sagacity, and Nestor, the oldest of the Grecian chiefs, and one to whom they all looked up for counsel. But Troy was no feeble enemy. Priam the king was now old, but he had been a wise prince and had strengthened his state by good government at home and numerous alliances with his neighbors. But the principal stay in support of his throne was his son Hector, one of the one of the noblest characters painted by heathen antiquity. Ooh, Bullfinch, no. Oof. He felt from the first a presentiment of the fall of his country, but still persevered in his heroic resistance. It by no means justified the wrong which brought this danger upon her. He was united in marriage with, I always forget how to say this one, Andromache? Andromache? Let's go with Andromache. He was united in marriage with Andromache, and as a husband and father his character was not less admirable than as a warrior. The principal leaders on the side of the Trojans, besides Hector, were Aeneas and Deiphobus, Glaucus, and Sarpedon. Sarpedon. Okay. I'm very excited to read. I settled on it. Did I get it right, Finn? Thank you. I'm very excited to read A Book of Dragons because this is not going to be nearly as hard as this is. I don't know why I decided to do this. After 2 years of preparation, the Greek fleet and army assembled in the port of Aulis in someplace. Again, those squished together letters that I don't like. Yes, and yeah, thanks. Typing it out doesn't help me, dude. Andromache. We'll say it like that. Okay. Anyway, after 2 years of preparation, the Greek fleet and army assembled in the port of Aulis. Here, Agamemnon, in hunting, killed a stag which was sacred to Diana, and the goddess in return visited the army with pestilence, and produced a calm which prevented the ships from leaving the port. Calchas, the soothsayer, thereupon announced that the wrath of the virgin goddess could only be appeased by the sacrifice of a virgin on her altar, and that none other but the daughter of the offender would be acceptable. Agamemnon, however reluctant, yielded his consent, and the maiden, Iphigenia, was sent for under the pretense that she was to be married to Achilles. When she was about to be sacrificed, the goddess relented and snatched her away, leaving a hind in her place. And Iphigenia, enveloped in a cloud, was carried to Taurus, where Diana made her a priestess of her temple. Whew, okay, good for you, Iphigenia. You got out of that one. The wind now proving fair, the fleet made sail and brought the forces to the coast of Troy. The Trojans came to oppose their landing, and at the first onset, Protesilaus fell by the hand of Hector. Protesilaus had left at home his wife, Laodamia, who was most tenderly attached to him. When the news of his death reached her, she implored the gods to be allowed to converse with him only 3 hours. The request was granted. Mercury led him back to the upper world, and when he died a second time, his wife died with him. There was a story that the nymphs planted elm trees round his grave, which grew very well till they were high enough to command a view of Troy, and then withered away, while fresh branches sprang from the roots. The war continued without decisive results for 9 years. Then an event occurred which seemed likely to be fatal to the cause of the Greeks, and that was a quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. It is at the point that the great poem of Homer, the Iliad, begins. The Greeks, though unsuccessful against Troy, had taken the neighboring and allied cities, and in the division of the spoil, a female captured by name Chryseis, daughter of Chryses, a priest of Apollo, had fallen to the share of Agamemnon. Chryses came bearing the sacred emblems of his office and begged the release of his daughter. Agamemnon refused. Thereupon Chryses implored Apollo to afflict the Greeks till they should be forced to yield their prey. Apollo granted the prayer of his priest and sent pestilence to the Grecian camp. Then a council was called to deliberate how to allay the wrath of the gods and avert the plague. Achilles boldly charged their misfortunes upon Agamemnon as caused by his withholding Chryseis. Agamemnon, enraged, consented to relinquish his captive, but demanded that Achilles should yield to him in her stead Briseis, a maiden who had fallen to Achilles' share in the division of the spoil. Achilles submitted, but forthwith declared that he would no further take part in the war. Let's just trade women. It's fine. We'll just trade the women around. It's totally cool. Yeah. He withdrew his forces from the general camp and openly avowed his intention of returning home to Greece. The gods and goddesses interested themselves as much in this famous war as the parties themselves. It was well known to them that fate had decreed that Troy should fall at last, if her enemies should persevere and not voluntarily abandon the enterprise. Yet there was room enough left for chance to excite by turns the hopes and fears of the powers above, who took part with either side. Juno and Minerva, in consequence of the slight put upon their charms by Paris, were hostile to the Trojans. Venus, for the opposite cause, favored them. Venus enlisted her admirer Mars on the same side, but Neptune favored the Greeks. Apollo was neutral, sometimes taking one side, sometimes the other, and Jove himself, though he loved the good King Priam, yet exercised a degree of impartiality, not, however, without exceptions. Thetis, the mother of Achilles, warmly resented the injury done her son. She repaired immediately to Jove's palace and besought him to make the Greeks repent of their injustice to Achilles by granting success to the Trojan arms. Jupiter consented, and in the battle which ensued the Trojans were completely successful. The Greeks were driven from the field and took refuge in their ships. Then Agamemnon called a council of his wisest and bravest chiefs. Nestor advised that an embassy should be sent to Achilles to persuade him to return to the field, that Agamemnon should yield the maiden, the cause of the dispute, with ample gifts to atone for the wrong he had done. Agamemnon consented, and Ulysses, Ajax, and Phoenix were sent to carry to Achilles the penitent message. They performed that duty, but Achilles was deaf to their entreaties. He positively refused to return to the field and persisted in his resolution to embark for Greece without delay. The Greeks had constructed a rampart around their ships, and now, instead of besieging Troy, they were in a manner besieged themselves within their rampart. The next day, after the unsuccessful embassy to Achilles, a battle was fought, and the Trojans, favored by Jove, were successful, and succeeded in forcing a passage through the Grecian rampart, and were about to set fire to the ships. Neptune, seeing the Greeks so pressed, came to their rescue. He appeared in the form of Calchas the prophet, encouraged the warriors with his shouts, and appealed to each individually, till he raised their ardor to such a pitch that they forced the Trojans to give way. Ajax performed prodigies of valor, and at length encountered Hector. Ajax shouted defiance, to which Hector replied, and hurled his lance at the huge warrior. It was well aimed, and struck Ajax, where the belts that bore his sword and shield crossed each other on his breast. The double guard prevented its penetrating, and it fell harmless. Then Ajax, seizing a huge stone, one of those that served to prop the ships, hurled it at Hector. It struck him in the neck and stretched him on the plain. His followers instantly seized him and bore him off, stunned and wounded. While Neptune was thus aiding the Greeks and driving back the Trojans, Jupiter saw nothing of what was going on, for his attention had been drawn from the field by the wiles of Juno. That goddess had arrayed herself in all her charms, and to crown all had borrowed of Venus her girdle, called cestus, which had the effect to heighten the wearer's charms to such a degree that they were quite irresistible. So prepared, Juno went to join her husband, who sat on Olympus watching the battle. When he beheld her, she looked so charming that the fondness of his early love revived, and forgetting the contending armies and all other affairs of state, he thought only of her, and let the battle go as it would. But this absorption did not continue long, and when, upon turning his eyes downward, he beheld Hector, stretched on the plain almost lifeless from pain and bruises, he dismissed Juno in a rage, commanding her to send Iris and Apollo to him. When Iris came, he sent her with a stern message to Neptune, ordering him instantly to quit the field. Apollo was dispatched to heal Hector's bruises and to inspirit his heart. These orders were obeyed with such speed that while the battle still raged, Hector returned to the field, and Neptune betook himself to his own dominions. An arrow from Paris's bow wounded Machaon, son of Asclepius, who inherited his father's art of healing, and was therefore of great value to the Greeks as their surgeon, besides being one of their bravest warriors. Nestor took Machaon in his chariot and conveyed him from the field. As they passed the ships of Achilles the hero, looking out over the field, saw the chariot of Nestor, and recognized the old chief, but could not discern who the wounded chief was. So calling Patroclus, his companion and dearest friend, he sent him to Nestor's tent to inquire. Patroclus, arriving at Nestor's tent, saw Machaon wounded, and having told the cause of his coming, would have hastened away, but Nestor detained him, to tell him the extent of the Grecian calamities. He reminded him also how, at the time of departing for Troy, Achilles and himself had been charged by their respective fathers with different advice. Achilles to aspire to the highest pitch of glory, Patroclus, as the elder, to keep watch over his friend and to guide his inexperience. Now, said Nestor, is the time for such influence. If the gods so please, thou mayst win him back to the common cause, but if not, let him at least send his soldiers to the field, and come thou, Patroclus, clad in his armor, and perhaps the very sight of it may drive back the Trojans. Patroclus was strongly moved with this address, and hastened back to Achilles, revolving in his mind all he had seen and heard. He told the prince the sad condition of affairs at the camp of their late associates. Diomede, Ulysses, Agamemnon, Machaon, all wounded, the rampart broken down, the enemy among the ships preparing to burn them, and thus to cut off all means of return to Greece. While they spoke, the flames burst forth from one of the ships. Achilles, at the sight, relented so far as to grant Patroclus his request to lead the Myrmidons, so were Achilles' soldiers called, to the field, and to lend him his armor, that he might thereby strike more terror into the minds of Trojans. Without delay, the soldiers were marshaled. Patroclus put on the radiant armor and mounted the chariot of Achilles, and led forth the men ardent for battle. But before he went, Achilles strictly charged him that he should be content with repelling the foe. Seek not, he said, to press the Trojans without me, lest thou add still more to the disgrace already mine. Then, exhorting the troops to do their best, he dismissed them full of ardor to the fight. Patroclus and his Myrmidons at once plunged into the contest where it raged hottest, at the sight of which the joyful Grecians shouted, and the ships re-echoed the acclaim. The Trojans, at the sight of the well-known armor, struck with terror, looked everywhere for refuge. First, those who had got possession of the ship and set it on fire left and allowed the Grecians to retake it and extinguish the flames. Then the rest of the Trojans fled in dismay. Ajax, Menelaus, and the two sons of Nestor performed prodigies of valor. Hector was forced to turn his horses' heads and retire from the enclosure, leaving his men entangled in the fosse to escape as they could. Patroclus drove them before him, slaying many, none daring to make a stand against him. At last, Sarpedon, son of Jove, ventured to oppose himself in fight to Patroclus. Jupiter looked down upon him and would have snatched him from the fate which awaited him, but Juno hinted that if he did so, it would induce all others of the inhabitants of heaven to interpose in like manner whenever any of their offspring were endangered. to which reason Jove yielded. Sarpedon threw his spear, but missed Patroclus. But Patroclus threw with his better success. It pierced Sarpedon's breast, and he fell, and calling to his friends to save his body from the foe, expired. Then a furious contest arose for the possession of the corpse. The Greeks succeeded and stripped Sarpedon of his armor, but Jove would not allow the remains of his son to be dishonored, and by his command Apollo snatched from the midst of the combatants the body of Sarpedon, and committed it to the care of the twin brothers Death and Sleep, by whom it was transported to Lycia, the native land of Sarpedon, where it received due funeral rites. Thus far, Patroclus had succeeded to his utmost wish in repelling the Trojans and relieving his countrymen. But now came a change of fortune. Hector, borne in his chariot, confronted him. Patroclus threw a vast stone at Hector, which missed its aim, but smote Cebriones, the charioteer, and knocked him from the car. Hector leapt from the chariot to rescue his friend, and Patroclus also descended to complete his victory. Thus the two heroes met face to face. At this decisive moment, the poet, as if reluctant to give Hector the glory, records that Phoebus took part against Patroclus. He struck the helmet from his head and the lance from his hand. At the same moment, an obscure Trojan wounded him in the back, and Hector, pressing forward, pierced him with his spear. He fell mortally wounded. Then arose a tremendous conflict for the body of Patroclus, but his armor was at once taken possession of by Hector, who, retiring a short distance, divested himself of his own armor and put on that of Achilles, then returned to the fight. Ajax and Menelaus defended the body, and Hector and his bravest warriors struggled to capture it. The battle raged with equal fortunes, when Jove enveloped the whole face of heaven with a dark cloud. The lightning flashed, the thunder roared, and Ajax, looking round for someone whom he might dispatch to Achilles to tell him of the death of his friend, and of the imminent danger that his remains would fall into the hands of the enemy, could see no suitable messenger. It was then that he exclaimed in those famous lines so often quoted, "Father of heaven and earth, deliver thou Achaea's host from darkness. Clear the skies, give day, and since thy sovereign will is such, destruction with it, but oh, give us day." Jupiter heard the prayer and dispatched the clouds. Then Ajax sent Antilochus to Achilles with the intelligence of Patroclus' death, and of the conflict raging for his remains. The Greeks at last succeeded in bearing off the body to the ships, closely pursued by Hector and Aeneas and the rest of the Trojans. Achilles heard the fate of his friend with such distress that Antilochus feared for a while that he would destroy himself. His groans reached the ears of his mother Thetis, far down in the depths of the ocean where she abode, and she hastened to him to inquire the cause. She found him overwhelmed with self-reproach that he had indulged his resentment so far and suffered his friend to fall a victim to it. But his only consolation was the hope of revenge. He would fly instantly in search of Hector, but his mother reminded him that he was now without armor, and promised him, if he would but wait till the morrow, she would procure for him a suit of armor from Vulcan, more than equal to that he had lost. He consented, and Thetis immediately repaired to Vulcan's palace. She found him busy at his forge making tripods for his own use, so artfully constructed that they moved forward of their own accord when wanted, and retired again when dismissed. On hearing the request of Thetis, Vulcan immediately laid aside his work and hastened to comply with her wishes. He fabricated a splendid suit of armor for Achilles. First a shield adorned with elaborate devices, then a helmet crested with gold, then a corselet and greaves of impenetrable temper, all perfectly adapted to his form, and of consummate workmanship. It was all done in one night, and Thetis, receiving it, descended with it to earth, and laid it down at Achilles' feet at the dawn of day. The first glow of pleasure that Achilles had felt since the death of Patroclus was at the sight of his splendid armor. And now, arrayed in it, he went forth into the camp, calling all the chiefs to council. When they were all assembled, he addressed them. Renouncing his displeasure against Agamemnon and bitterly lamenting the miseries that had resulted from it, he called upon them to proceed at once to the field. Agamemnon made a suitable reply, laying all the blame on Ate, the goddess of discord, and thereupon complete reconcilement took place between the heroes. Yeah, just blame some random woman. That's fine. Then Achilles went forth to battle, inspired with a rage and thirst for vengeance that made him irresistible. The bravest warriors fled before him or fell by his lance. Hector, cautioned by Apollo, kept aloof, but the god, assuming the form of one of Priam's sons, Lycaon, urged Aeneas to encounter the terrible warrior. Aeneas, though he felt himself unequal, did not decline the combat. He hurled his spear with all his force against the shield, the work of Vulcan. It was formed of 5 metal plates. 2 were of brass, 2 of tin, and 1 of gold. The spear pierced 2 thicknesses, but was stopped in the 3rd. Achilles threw his with better success. It pierced through the shield of Aeneas, but glanced near his shoulder and made no wound. Then Aeneas seized a stone, such as 2 men of modern times could hardly lift, and was about to throw it, and Achilles, with sword drawn, was about to rush upon him, when Neptune, who looked upon the contest, moved with pity for Aeneas, who he saw would surely fall a victim if not speedily rescued, spread a cloud between the combatants, and lifting Aeneas from the ground, bore him over the heads of the warriors and steeds to the rear of the battle. Achilles, when the mist cleared away, looked round in vain for his adversary, and acknowledging the prodigy, turned his arms against other champions. But none dared stand before him, and Priam, looking down from the city walls, beheld his whole army in full flight towards the city. He gave command to open wide the gates to receive the fugitives, and to shut them as soon as the Trojans should have passed, lest the enemy should enter likewise. But Achilles was so close in pursuit that would have been impossible if Apollo had not, in the form of Agenor, Priam's son, encountered Achilles for a while, then turned to fly, and taken the way apart from the city. Achilles pursued, and had chased his supposed victim far from the walls, when Apollo disclosed himself, and Achilles, perceiving how he had been deluded, gave up the chase. But when the rest had escaped into the town, Hector stood without, determined to await the combat. His old father called to him from the walls and begged him to retire, nor tempt the encounter. His mother Hecuba also besought him to the same effect, but all in vain. "How can I," said he to himself, "by whose command the people went to this day's contest, where so many have fallen, seek safety for myself against a single foe? But what if I offer him to yield up Helen and all her treasures and ample of our own beside? Ah, no, it is too late. He would not even hear me speak, but slay me while I spoke." While he thus ruminated, Achilles approached, terrible as Mars, his armor flashing lightning as he moved. At that sight, Hector's heart failed him, and he fled. Achilles swiftly pursued. They ran, still keeping near the walls, till they had thrice encircled the city. As often as Hector approached the walls, Achilles intercepted him, and forced him to keep out in a wider circle. But Apollo sustained Hector's strength and would not let him sink in weariness. Then Pallas, assuming the form of Deiphobus, Hector's bravest brother, appeared suddenly at his side. Hector saw him with delight, and thus strengthened, stopped his flight and turned to meet Achilles. Hector threw his spear, which struck the shield of Achilles and bounded back. He turned to receive another from the hand of Deiphobus, but Deiphobus was gone. Then Hector understood his doom and said, "Alas, it is plain this is my hour to die. I thought Deiphobus at hand, but Pallas deceived me, and he is still in Troy. But I will not fall inglorious." So saying, he drew his falchion from his side and rushed at once to combat. Achilles, secure behind his shield, waited the approach of Hector. When he came within reach of his spear, Achilles, choosing with his eye a vulnerable part where the armor leaves the neck uncovered, aimed his spear for that part. And Hector fell, death wounded, and feebly said, "Spare my body. Let my parents ransom it, and let me receive funeral rites from the sons and daughters of Troy." To which Achilles replied, "Dog, name not ransom nor pity to me, on whom you have brought such dire distress. No, trust me, naught shall save thy carcass from the dogs. Though 20 ransoms and thy weight in gold were offered, I would refuse it all." So saying, he stripped the body of its armor, and fastening cords to the feet, tied them behind his chariot, leaving the body to trail along the ground. Then mounting the chariot, he lashed the steeds, and so dragged the body to and fro before the city. What words can tell the grief of King Priam and Queen Hecuba at this sight? His people could scarce restrain the old king from rushing forth. He threw himself in the dust and besought them each by name to give him way. Hecuba's distress was not less violent. The citizens stood round them weeping. The sound of mourning reached the ears of Andromache, the wife of Hector, as she sat among her maidens at work, and anticipating evil, she went forth to the wall. When she saw the sight there, she would have thrown herself headlong from the wall, but fainted and fell into the arms of her maidens. Recovering, she bewailed her fate, picturing to herself her country ruined, herself a captive, and her son dependent for his bread on the charity of strangers. When Achilles and the Greeks had taken their revenge on the killer of Patroclus, they busied themselves in paying due funeral rites to their friend. A pile was erected, and the body burned with due solemnity. And then ensued games of strength and skill, chariot races, wrestling, boxing, and archery. Then the chief sat down to the funeral banquet, and after that retired to rest. But Achilles neither partook of the feast nor of sleep. The recollection of his lost friend kept him awake, remembering their companionship in toil and dangers, in battle or on the perilous deep. Before the earliest dawn he left his tent, and joining to his chariot his swift steeds, he fastened Hector's body to be dragged behind. Twice he dragged him round the tomb of Patroclus, leaving him at length stretched in the dust. But Apollo would not permit the body to be torn or disfigured with all this abuse, but preserved it free from all taint or defilement. While Achilles indulged his wrath in thus disgracing brave Hector, Jupiter, in pity, summoned Thetis to his presence. He told her to go to her son and prevail on him to restore the body of Hector to his friends. Then Jupiter sent Iris to King Priam to encourage him to go to Achilles and beg the body of his son. Iris delivered her message, and Priam immediately prepared to obey. He opened his treasuries and took out rich garments and cloths with 10 talents in gold and 2 splendid tripods in a golden cup of matchless workmanship. Then he called to his sons and bade them draw forth his litter and place in it the various articles designed for a ransom to Achilles. When all was ready, the old king, with a single companion as aged as himself, the herald Idaeus, drove forth from the gates, parting there with Hecuba his queen and all his friends, who lamented him as going to certain death. But Jupiter, beholding with compassion the venerable king, sent Mercury to be his guide and protector. Mercury, assuming the form of a young warrior, presented himself to the aged couple, and while at the sight of him they hesitated whether to fly or yield, the god approached, and, grasping Priam's hand, offered to be their guide to Achilles' tent. Priam gladly accepted his offered service, and he, mounting the carriage, assumed the reins and soon conveyed them to the tent of Achilles. Mercury's wand put to sleep all the guards, and without hindrance he introduced Priam into the tent where Achilles sat, attended by 2 of his warriors. The old king threw himself at the feet of Achilles and kissed those terrible hands which had destroyed so many of his sons. "Think, O Achilles," he said, "of thy own father, full of days like me, and trembling on the gloomy verge of life. Perhaps even now some neighbor chief opposes him, and there is none at hand to succor him in his distress. Yet, doubtless knowing that Achilles lives, he still rejoices, hoping that one day he shall see thy face again. But no comfort cheers me, whose bravest sons, so late the flower of Ilium, all have fallen. Yet one I had, one more than all the rest, the strength of my age, whom fighting for his country thou hast slain. I come to redeem his body, bringing inestimable ransom with me. Achilles, reverence the gods, recollect thy father, for his sake show compassion to me." These words moved Achilles, and he wept, remembering by turns his absent father and his lost friend. Moved with pity of Priam's silver locks and beard, he raised him from the earth, and thus spake. "Priam, I know that thou hast reached this place conducted by some god, for without aid divine no mortal even in the prime of youth had dared the attempt. I grant thy request, moved thereto by the evident will of Jove." So saying, he arose, and went forth with his 2 friends, and unloaded of its charge the litter, leaving 2 mantles and a robe for the covering of the body, which they placed on the litter, and spread the garments over it, that not unveiled it should be borne back to Troy. Then Achilles dismissed the old king with his attendants, having first pledged himself to allow a truce of 12 days for the funeral solemnities. As the litter approached the city and was descried from the walls, the people poured forth to gaze once more on the face of their hero. Foremost of all, the mother and the wife of Hector came, and at the sight of the lifeless body renewed their lamentations. The people all wept with them, and to the going down of the sun there was no pause or abatement of their grief. The next day preparations were made for the funeral solemnities. For 9 days the people brought wood and built the pile, and on the 10th they placed the body on the summit and applied the torch, while all Troy thronging forth encompassed the pile. When it had completely burned, they quenched the cinders with wine, collected the bones, and placed them in a golden urn, which they buried in the earth, and reared a pile of stones over the spot. That was vaguely exhausting. But we haven't finished. That is the end of the Iliad. But what of the Odyssey? Let's see. How many pages is this one? I don't know, man. We might need to save this for another day. I am tired. I tell you what. If you guys want, we can come back to this in December for Audience Request Day. But only if you request it. Haha! So, I'm going to once again share this. There we go. If you have a story you would like to request, either from an upcoming scheduled date or just for the Audience Request Day, you can go ahead and email me at thebardicbelle@gmail.com. You can also join the Discord, pop in there, say hello. I'm sure I'll post some other memes at some point. But I'm afraid that that was so exhausting, I'm going to have to call it a day. It has been so much fun hanging out with you guys. Wonderful, wonderful to see you all. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have a few things coming up this week. We have on Tuesday, we have The Quizzard and I. Wonderful. I believe The Quizzard and I, we're going to be doing Dragon Ball Z this week. Yes, this Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a lot of fun. There's always a wonderful guest. Yes, Dragon Ball Z. And you can always compete against the guest. See if we can beat the guest this time. Yes. So yes, Dragon Ball Z. I know nothing, so I will probably not be participating, but it's a lot of fun, and you should pop on by. Wednesday, of course, there's Wednesday Wine Talk, and then back again on next Saturday for some more Tea Time Tales. Next week again is The Book of Dragons by Edith Nesbit. I'm very excited about that one. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm Bardic Belle there as well. And again, pop on over to the Discord. Good group of people, a lot of fun. So yeah. Oh, and you can also catch me Friday nights at Slady's ATL. We're doing a game, a 5e, D&D 5e game as magical girls. So that's a lot of fun too. But once again, thank you for coming. I hope you had a lovely, relaxing afternoon. Make sure you take care of yourselves. Get some rest. Get some hydration. Take your meds. And have a good night. Thank you, everybody.